into the sea, mountains into the sea.
Welcome to the Our State Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Wiley Cash. In this episode, we visit the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame at the Weymouth Center in Southern Pines, North Carolina, to make some reading recommendations for this fall from writers and booksellers across the state.
Mountains in the sea.
Before we get started with our recommendations from booksellers and writers from across the state for books that are coming this fall, I want to remind folks that the August selection of the Our State Book Club is Brendan Slocum's Symphony of Secrets. If you've seen our print magazine for August, you can find my review there. I absolutely loved this book. I read it literally in one day. I was very indulgent, and I got a massage at the Grove Park Inn Spa, and I spent the day in the hot tubs and the plunge pools and sitting outside reading Symphony of Secrets. And at one point, I was in the jacuzzi. I thought I was alone. My back was turned to the door. I was fully invested in the book, and I came across something that really surprised me, and I said something out loud like, "No way," or "Oh my gosh," or "I didn't see that coming." And there was a guy in the jacuzzi with me, and he said, "What?" It scared me to death. I almost jumped out of the jacuzzi. I was so locked in on the book, and I know that you will be too. Normally, we'd be hosting Brendan this month on the podcast. We had some scheduling difficulties, but we will get him soon, and we will let you know when that happens. But until then, enjoy these reading selections for the upcoming fall. Our first recommendation for fall reading comes from Pete Mock, a bookseller at McIntyre's Books in Pittsburgh, North Carolina. McIntyre's Books is an incredible bookstore in Fearington Village. If you joined us for our first live event of the book club, you were there when I joined Lee Smith and editor Elizabeth Hudson on stage. It was a wonderful night. Pete has really become the master of suspense and mystery novels in North Carolina. He holds a yearly conference there at McIntyre's where he brings mystery writers and mystery lovers together. And this is Pete's recommendation from McIntyre Books for his fall reading. Pete's recommendation is Kings of Coetzee by Dale Neal. This novel, Pete says, is set deep in the mountains of North Carolina. It's about as southern as a book can get. From the vernacular that rings so true in the ear as you read, to the gorgeous setting that can cool you off during a summer heat wave. And the people. Can't forget the people who live the same lives as generations before them, content with the everyday rhythms until the out-of-staters begin to arrive and slowly force a change of pace upon them that threatens the very peace that has imbued the land forever. And it all begins with a stolen ballot box. Crime, as I said, is the expertise of Pete Mock in McIntyre's Books in Fearington Village. Our next recommendation comes from a writer from the eastern part of the state, Ashley Bryant Phillips. Several years ago, Ashley published a gorgeous debut story collection with Hub City Press out of Spartanburg, South Carolina, and the collection was called Sleepovers. It won their Michael C. Curtis Short Story Prize, and it's a wonderful collection set in eastern North Carolina where Ashley grew up. And Ashley recommends a book that is also published by Hub City. It's called Little Ones by a writer, an Asheville-based writer named Gray Wolf LaJoie. This is quite the experience for me to get to announce this recommendation from Ashley because Gray was one of my undergraduates at UNC Asheville during the fall of 2016. And since then, Gray has gone on to a wonderful experience in graduate school. He actually had some graduate programs fighting over him during the application process, which we were all very happy to see at the university. But his first short story collection is called Little Ones. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why Ashley recommends it. Ashley says, Little Ones is wholly, exciting, original, and strange. It says, listen to that little voice deep down inside. Remember it? That's your imagination, and it's the only way you'll survive. Ashley says, Gray Wolf LaJoie has blessed us for now and forever. I'll never see the world the same again. This is one of the most original, exciting, and inspiring short story collections I've ever read, and all of us North Carolinians should be proud that Gray is from Asheville. I'm certainly proud of Gray. I'm also very proud of Ashley. We have another bookseller recommendation. This one comes from Holly Bader, who is the owner of a relatively new independent bookstore in downtown Wilmington on Market Street called Paper Cuts. This is a gorgeous little shop. They seem to specialize in sci-fi and fantasy and popular romance. It's a really special place. We love shopping there as much as possible, and we love taking our kids because they have a great kids section. So the book that Holly recommends is by a writer named T. Kingfisher, and the book is called A Sorceress Comes to Call. Holly says, this is a dark reimagining of the Brothers Grimm's The Goose Girl, rife with secrets, murder, and forbidden magic. She goes on to say, everything that T. Kingfisher writes is so good, from horror to fairy tale retellings. Her books have been some of our best sellers, especially her 2022 horror novella, What Moves the Dead, which is a retelling of Poe's A Fall of the House of Usher. Our next recommendation comes from Alyssa Redman at the South Main Book Company in beautiful Salisbury, North Carolina. If you listen to last month's episodes with Christy Woodson Harvey, we talked a lot about Salisbury and what a wonderful literary town it is. And South Main Book Company has a lot to do with that. So does the Great Bed and Breakfast across the pond, which is owned by a couple from England. And that place is slam full of books. So check out both those businesses if you find yourself in Salisbury. So Alyssa recommends The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young of Western North Carolina. Alyssa says, this book blew me away. The concept for this book is unlike any I've read, which reminded me of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, more for the inventiveness of the author than for the actual content of the story. I am always intrigued by authors who play with time as a malleable force to be tamed, and Young sets a high bar here for her readers, who can let their imagination run wild. In this novel, The Unmaking of June Farrow, a woman risks everything to end her family's century-old curse, solve her mother's disappearance, and find love in Western North Carolina. Alyssa also has another recommendation for us out of the South Main Book Company in Salisbury, North Carolina, and she recommends David Joy and his new novel, which is out in paperback in late August. It's titled Those We Thought We Knew. Alyssa says, this is the stunningly crafted work of art. Joy creates so many fully fleshed voices and turns out a story that can only come from this place and this time, which is to say Western North Carolina. To be able to articulate a grandmother's resistance and her grandchild's brilliance, what an accomplished author to be able to bring their characters and so many others across authentically. And I want to say that I am joining David and also musician, Gaston County musician, David Childers, for an event on August 27th at the Belmont Bookshop in Belmont, North Carolina. So check that out online if you would like to join us for that. It's going to be a really, really fun event. So we've gone through our fiction recommendations for our fall reading, and I would like to move on now to some nonfiction recommendations, because there is more to the world than just making stuff up, even though that's what I prefer to do. So to move on to our nonfiction recommendations, we just talked for a moment about David Joy's new novel, Those We Thought We Knew, which is out in paperback in late August. David Joy himself has a recommendation for us. And David recommends Leanne Henyon's new book, which will be out here in the fall. It is called Night Magic: Adventures Among Glowworms, Moon Gardens, and Other Marvels of the Dark. And David says, it comes out in September, and it's absolutely wonderful. David, we agree. We agree so much that if I were predicting the future, I think it's going to be a future pick of the Our State Book Club. So look for that coming soon. We'll be doing a live event with Leanne somewhere in Western North Carolina. We're still planning it, but it's going to be really exciting. And I'm really excited because Leanne and I have known each other since we were 18 years old when we met as undergraduates at UNC Asheville. So it's been such a joy to watch her success and her writing these wonderful books. Our next recommendations come from Maggie Robe over at Flyleaf Books in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. As some of you might know, my wife spent the past year in the journalism program, a master's program at UNC Chapel Hill, and we spent a lot of time and a lot of money at Flyleaf Books. It's such a wonderful bookstore. It's such a resource for the Triangle, and they have one of the best selections of used books that I've ever seen, contemporary used books. So if you find yourself in the Triangle, check out Flyleaf Books. So we have 3 recommendations from Maggie at this bookstore. The first is Loving Corrections by Durham-based writer Adrienne Marie Brown. This book is a roadmap towards collective power, righting wrongs, and true belonging. The next recommendation we have is by Hillsborough author and North Carolina Piedmont laureate Stephen Petrow. His new title is The Joy You Make. It comes out in early September, and here's a little more about it. In The Joy You Make, Petrow explores the many expressions of joy and shows readers how to find, cultivate, and share it. He takes us on a journey from the darkness of the Arctic to a frenetic cancer ward in Manhattan, a trip that includes his parents' deaths, the breakup of his marriage, and his sister's cancer diagnosis. Combining his personal experiences with research and expert interviews, Petrow asks and answers the question, what if there was a way to find joy in everything? I've known Stephen for quite a while. The first time I met him was on book tour for my first novel, A Land More Kind Than Home. When I went across the state of North Carolina, at every tour stop, I partnered with literacy councils. And Stephen was deeply involved with the Literacy Council in Orange County. And he was so kind. He took me out to dinner with a bunch of famous people, a bunch of famous writers, and I've never forgotten it. So check out Stephen's book when it comes out this fall. The last recommendation from Flyleaf Books is by a writer that they know very well, a writer who also happens to be a recent inductee into the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame, where we are right now. The writer's name is Bland Simpson, a longtime professor at UNC Chapel Hill and a beloved North Carolina writer. Bland's new book is called Clover Garden, a Carolinian's Piedmont memoir. It's written by him, and it features photographs by his wife, Anne Clary Simpson. Here's a little bit about the book. Here, for the first time, Bland Simpson trains his attention on Clover Garden, the Piedmont community where he has lived for some 50 years. With a naturalist eye, a storyteller's mind, and a poet's soul, Simpson guides readers into a deep engagement with the Piedmont, both as a material place and as an idea. Clover Garden invites us to think more broadly about the natural and human history of the Piedmont South. This book will be treasured by all who seek to live deeply in the places we call home. Our next recommendation for fall reading comes from Ed Southern, who is the executive director of the North Carolina Writers Network. And the North Carolina Writers Network is actually who runs the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame. The Writers Network does an incredible amount of good for writers and readers across the state. They host regional conferences. They have a wonderful magazine. They host wonderful contests. And so it's a great organization for writers and for readers in North Carolina to join. So Ed's recommendation is for a new book that's forthcoming about another member of the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame, and that member is Paul Green. It's coming from Blair this fall, and it is titled Paul Green, North Carolina Writers on the Legacy of the State's Most Celebrated Playwright. Here's a little bit about the book. Paul Green is best known for his outdoor historical dramas, which are still performed across the United States. However, he was not only a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, but he was also an activist committed to human rights, racial equity, prison reform, and ending the death penalty. This anthology includes the frank reflections from an award-winning array of contemporary North Carolina writers. Their essays about Green's work and relationships are meant to launch new conversations about a man who was seen as progressive, even radical, in his time. To close out our nonfiction recommendations is a recommendation from Nina de Gramont, a novelist who lives down in Wilmington, North Carolina, and teaches at UNC Wilmington. You probably know Nina from her previous novels, but you certainly know her from her recent blockbuster, The Christie Affair, which is about what happens when Agatha Christie suspiciously and mysteriously goes missing for a stretch of days. The novel was a huge bestseller, and it's suspenseful and interesting and fun. So here is Nina's recommendation. Nina recommends an upcoming essay collection by her co-worker, Antony Dasgupta. The book is called Brown Women Have Everything, Essays on Discomfort and Delight. And here's a little bit about Antony's book. As a child growing up in New Delhi, Antony wanted to go on adventures involving shipwrecks and treasure chests. Her parents wanted her to stay in school instead. She satisfied her curiosity by drawing maps, inventing languages with friends, and reading everything: English adventures, Russian folk tales, Hindi comics, Bengali ghost stories. Her essay collection, Brown Women Have Everything, embraces the same spirit of wonder as we follow Antony, now living and teaching in the United States, to cathedrals in Italy, pirate graveyards in North Carolina, hair salons in Idaho, her aunt's kitchen in Bangladesh, graffiti-lined streets of Colombia, the hierarchical world of academia, and her marriage to a handsome Sikh. Nina says, Antony's writing is funny, it's wise, it's audacious, and illuminating. I can't wait to read this collection, and I think you'll love it too. But we don't want to leave out the young folks. So we've got some special recommendations here for young readers, kids, and young adults. Our first recommendation comes from Wilmington, from Kathleen Jewell, who is the owner of Pomegranate Books on Park Avenue, a wonderful bookstore. I had one of my first events on my book tour for my first novel there way back in 2012, and I'll never forget pulling up into the parking lot for the event. I was super nervous because I knew a lot of folks in Wilmington. My wife's from Wilmington. I was just so nervous. And I remember somebody hollered my name from across the parking lot, and I looked up, and it was Clyde Edgerton. And friends, I thought I was going to die. I said it was like shooting free throws while Michael Jordan was sitting in the stands alone watching you and judging everything you were doing. But since then, Clyde and I have ended up being buddies, and it was a wonderful experience to be in Kathleen's wonderful store. The book that Kathleen recommends for us is by Amy Cherricks. Now, Amy now lives in Eastern North Carolina on the coast there, but once upon a time, Amy was a bookseller at Malaprop's bookstore in Asheville, North Carolina, one of our state's iconic bookstores. And Amy has been writing children's books and books for young readers for a couple of years. We have some of her books at home at our house. And her new book is called Virus Hunters: How Science Protects People When Outbreaks and Pandemics Strike. And this is from a starred review in Publishers Weekly. In this thrilling work, Cherricks breaks down the fascinating careers of scientists employed in the Epidemic Intelligence Service. She details instances of scientists identifying, tracking, and working to eradicate pandemic viruses as one would an Indiana Jones adventure. Each selection culminates in this highly educational work that reads like a gripping and timely whodunit. Our next recommendations for kids and young readers come from Jamie Rogers Southern. Jamie is the manager of Bookmarks, which is a bookstore in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She's also the executive director of Bookmarks, which is a nonprofit organization geared toward literacy and sharing the value of the written word with members of that wonderful community. It's one of my favorite bookstores in the state. It also shares a space with the brewery, which doesn't hurt when you're trying to have events. So if you're a reader, go there and check it out. If you're a writer, please consider going there on book tour. They have incredible events. So Jamie recommends 2 books for us. The first is a children's picture book. It's called Black Girl, Black Girl by Ali Kamanda and Jorge Redmond. This is from the authors of a book called Black Boy, Black Boy. And this is a new inspiring picture book about self-esteem for Black girls, drawing on the history of role models who came before them. The next book that Jamie recommends is called Where the Library Hides, and this is by an Asheville-based writer named Isabel Ibanez. This is the second book in her new young adult fantasy series. This series started with the book What the River Knows, and her new novel is a lush, immersive historical fantasy set in Egypt, filled with adventure and romance and all the kind of things that young folks are interested in these days. I want to close out with a recommendation for a book that I'm very excited about. The book is titled Death in Briar Bottom: The True Story of Hippies, Mountain Lawmen, and the Search for Justice in the Early 1970s. This book is by Timothy Silver. He's a professor emeritus of history at Appalachian State University. And some of us love true crime. I know I do. I always feel a little bit guilty about liking true crime. So if I can learn something that is important historically or culturally from a true crime book, it makes it even more interesting for me to read it. And this is definitely one of those books. It's a mix of true crime, Appalachian history, and memoir. It shows readers how, in the dark of an Appalachian night, the murder of an unarmed 20-year-old by the local county sheriff at a campground in North Carolina exemplified the violence against the counterculture of an entire era. I hope you enjoyed our fall reading preview. All of these books are recommended either by North Carolina authors or North Carolina booksellers. And I think it's a real reminder of what a rich literary legacy and what a contemporary legacy we have in North Carolina. We have such wonderful independent bookstores at work here, and we have such wonderful authors whose books you can purchase at all of these stores. Today's July 19th. This is going to come out in a couple of weeks, and a lot of you have written to us about how much you like the music for the podcast, which was made and recorded by Beta Radio, which is a band. It's two guys, Ben Mabry and Brent Holloman, from Wilmington, North Carolina. Well, today, July 19th, they are releasing a new record. It's called Waiting for the End to Come. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous album. I should know. I wrote the media kit, so I've probably listened to this album more than these guys have. So you can find it wherever you get the music. You can download it, go to their website. It's a wonderful record. So thank you again for joining us for this reading episode. We'll be back later this month with some craft talk, pulling from some of the previous episodes we have with North Carolina writers. I want to thank the Weymouth Center for Arts and Humanities here in beautiful Southern Pines, North Carolina, for hosting the Our State Book Club podcast. If you happen to be in this part of the state, please come down to Weymouth. The gardens are absolutely gorgeous. You can tour the Boyd Tract, one of the oldest longleaf pines in the country is hidden in those woods somewhere. Come check it out. It's a really, really special place.
What might it be like underneath the sunrise in a state of flight? Coming back on me, it seems wonderful, the wandering mountain birds on a beach. Never moments ever wasted, turning away from your love. Honeybees, gardens of sweeter fruit never tasted, no turning to other things. Will you be, will you seem? Sweeter fruit never tasted, don't turn your back on me. Mountains pushing into the sea, mountains into the sea.